They say God is never late. He arrives exactly when the heart is ready, and when kindness is chosen in silence, heaven takes notice. There are people in this world who serve meals to hungry teenagers, who wipe tables no one thanks them for cleaning, who carry wisdom the world dismisses as old-fashioned. The world calls them ordinary. But God, He sees every gentle word, every patient moment, every act of love performed in the chaos of a school cafeteria. This is a story about a woman who thought her purpose was ending, and how God was actually preparing her for something completely new. I have a powerful testimony to share with you today, but I need you to promise me something. If you stay until the end of this story, you will see how God works in mysterious ways. Subscribe now so you don't miss any testimony that could be the exact message your heart needs today. And tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from? And let me ask you, have you ever felt that God answered a prayer when you least expected it? I want to hear your story. Her name was Rebecca Turner. She was 69 years old, and she worked as a cafeteria supervisor at a public school in a working-class neighborhood of Raleigh, North Carolina. Every day she served meals, organized lines, wiped tables sticky with spilled juice and forgotten ketchup, and quietly watched teenagers carry burdens no one seemed to notice. To most people, she was just Mrs. Turner from the cafeteria, a kind older woman, with a gentle smile who made sure everyone got fed. But to God, she had always been seen. Rebecca had the kind of appearance that blended into the background of institutional life. She had gentle, weathered features, fair skin marked by decades of hard work and southern sun, soft silver hair always pulled back in a simple bun, and eyes that reflected both exhaustion and deep compassion. Her hands were strong despite her age, accustomed to lifting heavy trays and scrubbing stubborn stains. She wore simple clothes, sensible shoes with good support, plain slacks, and the standard cafeteria uniform polo shirt that had faded from countless washings. Every morning before work, Rebecca would sit alone at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee that always went cold before she finished it. She would open her late husband's old Bible, its pages worn soft from years of being read, its margins filled with his handwritten notes and underlined verses. She would read a passage, close her eyes, and pray. Not elaborate prayers, not eloquent ones, just honest conversations with God about her fears, her loneliness, her uncertainty about the future. Then she would drive to the school in her aging sedan, park in the same spot she'd used for 12 years, and begin her day. She arrived early to prep the kitchen, to make sure the breakfast service ran smoothly, to greet students with a warmth most of them desperately needed but would never acknowledge. She moved through the cafeteria with practiced efficiency, directing the lunch line, solving small crises, mediating disputes over who cut in line, and making sure the quieter kids didn't get overlooked or bullied while waiting for their food. Rebecca's faith wasn't something she talked about constantly. It was something she lived, quietly, steadily, like a heartbeat you don't notice until you stop to pay attention. She believed that every student who walked through those cafeteria doors was a child of God, worthy of dignity and kindness regardless of their attitude, their grades, or their circumstances. And she showed up every single day to prove it, even when her own heart was breaking, even when her own life felt like it was falling apart. Rebecca hadn't always been alone. For 43 years, she had been married to Thomas Turner, a good man, a faithful man, a man who made her laugh even on hard days. They had built a life together in that house in Raleigh, raised their daughter there, dreamed of retirement and grandchildren and growing old side by side. But in October of the previous year, Thomas had died suddenly of a heart attack. One moment he was raking leaves in the backyard, and the next he was gone. The grief had been devastating, not the dramatic, movie kind of grief that comes in waves and then recedes, but the slow, grinding grief that settles into your bones and changes the shape of everything. The house, felt too big now, too silent, too full of memories that ached every time she turned a corner. His chair still sat in the living room, his coffee mug still hung in the kitchen cabinet, his Bible still rested on the nightstand beside what used to be his side of the bed. Rebecca couldn't bring herself to move any of it. She had thrown herself into work after Thomas died, not because she loved the job particularly, but because it gave her somewhere to go, something to do, a reason to get out of bed when every part of her wanted to stay hidden under the covers. The students became a distraction from her pain. Their noise filled the silence. Their needs gave her purpose when her own life felt purposeless. But November 2025 had been the hardest month she could remember. The first anniversary of Thomas's death passed with unbearable weight. She spent that day at work, serving lunch with a smile plastered on her face, then went home and cried until she had no tears left. Her daughter Sarah called from Chicago, but the conversation was brief, strained. Sarah had her own life, her own struggles, her own distance from the mother she no longer quite knew how to comfort. Then came December, and with it, a series of blows that felt deliberately cruel. At the beginning of the month, the school district announced budget cuts. Several positions would be eliminated at the start of 2026, and cafeteria supervisor was on the list of roles being restructured. The principal assured her they'd try to keep her on in some capacity, but Rebecca read between the lines. At 69, she would likely be considered too old to be worth keeping. She would be pushed into retirement whether she wanted it or not. A few days later came the second blow. Sarah called to say she wouldn't be able to come home for Christmas. Money was too tight. Work was demanding extra shifts. The excuses piled up, but beneath them Rebecca heard the truth. Her daughter didn't want to spend the holidays in that house full of ghosts, didn't want to sit at a table with one empty chair, didn't want to face the grief that still hung in the air like fog. The thought of spending Christmas alone, the first Christmas without Thomas, broke Rebecca's heart in ways she couldn't articulate. The week before Christmas brought the third blow, a notice from the bank. She was 2 mortgage payments behind. In the fog of grief, Rebecca had lost track of bills, had let things slide, had been too overwhelmed to manage the finances Thomas had always handled. The home they had built together, the place where they'd raised their daughter, celebrated anniversaries, dreamed of the future, now felt fragile, uncertain, at risk. Everything seemed to be collapsing at once. It was the last week of school before Christmas break, the week when students were restless, teachers were exhausted, and the whole building hummed with the chaotic energy of people desperate for a pause. Outside, the weather forecasters had been warning about a severe winter storm moving in, the kind that could drop several inches of snow in just a few hours and make roads impassable. The school administration debated whether to dismiss early, but by mid-morning, the decision was made. They would keep students in the building until parents could safely pick them up or buses could run. By lunchtime, the storm had arrived in full force. Snow fell in thick, heavy sheets, driven sideways by wind that howled against the cafeteria windows. The sky had turned a dark, bruised gray. The temperature had dropped so fast that ice was already forming on the power lines visible from the second-floor hallway. Inside the building, the lights flickered occasionally, just enough to make everyone nervous. The cafeteria, normally loud and chaotic, had taken on a different energy. Students were anxious, looking at their phones, texting parents, whispering about whether they'd be stuck at school overnight. Rebecca moved through the lunch service, trying to project calm she didn't feel. Her body was tired. Every joint ached. Every step felt heavier than it should. Her spirit felt worn down to nothing. She kept thinking about the mortgage notice, about Christmas alone, about the job she was about to lose. The storm outside felt like a mirror of the storm raging inside her. Dark, cold, relentless, threatening to bury everything she had left. Then, just as the second lunch period was starting, she heard it, a commotion near the back tables, raised voices, nervous laughter, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Rebecca's instincts kicked in immediately. She knew that sound, knew it meant something was wrong. She moved quickly toward the noise, weaving between tables, her heart already racing. What she found stopped her cold. A 15-year-old boy named Caleb was on the floor, his back against the wall, gasping for air like he was drowning. His eyes were wide with terror, his hands clutched at his chest, his whole body shook violently. Panic attack. Rebecca recognized it immediately, but the other students didn't. Some were laughing nervously, uncomfortable with the display of vulnerability. Others had their phones out, recording him, ready to turn his suffering into content for social media. No one was helping. No one knew what to do. The storm outside raged. The lights flickered again, and Rebecca understood in that moment that this was her storm too, not just Caleb's. This was the moment that would define whether she had anything left to give, whether her faith was real or just words she repeated to make herself feel better, whether she was still capable of showing up for someone else when her own life was falling apart. That night, after the storm had passed, after the students had all been picked up, after the building had gone quiet, Rebecca sat alone in the empty cafeteria. The janitors were still working in other parts of the school. The halls echoed with the sound of industrial floor cleaners. But here, in this space where she had spent so many years serving meals and watching children grow, Rebecca bowed her head and prayed. Not the morning prayer she whispered over cold coffee, not the routine blessing before meals, but a desperate, raw prayer that came from the deepest part of her soul. God, I don't understand your timing. I don't understand why everything is falling apart, but I'm begging you, teach me to trust it. Teach me to believe you haven't forgotten me. Rebecca didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She didn't worry about protocol or liability or what the other staff members might think. She just moved. Despite her 69 years and her tired legs and the arthritis that made her knees ache, she dropped to the floor beside Caleb and knelt there in the midst of the chaos. The cafeteria floor was sticky and gross, covered in spilled food and tracked in snow, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the terrified boy in front of her who couldn't breathe. Up close, she could see him more clearly. Caleb was thin, too thin, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. His clothes were worn but clean, his sneakers held together with duct tape. His breathing was ragged, desperate, the kind that comes when your body forgets how to work and your mind convinces you you're dying. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. His hands trembled violently as they clutched at his chest, as if he could physically pull the fear out of his own body. Rebecca had seen this boy before, seen him every day at lunch, actually. He was one of the quiet ones, the ones who moved through the cafeteria line quickly and ate alone at a corner table, head down, earbuds in, trying to be invisible. She knew his name because she made it her business to know every student's name. But she didn't know his story, didn't know what carried him to this moment of complete breakdown. All she knew was that he was suffering, and everyone else was treating it like entertainment. For just a second, Rebecca felt a flash of anger. Anger at the students, recording on their phones. Anger at the teachers who hadn't noticed this boy was drowning. Anger at a system that was so overwhelmed it couldn't see the children falling through the cracks. But she pushed the anger aside. There would be time for that later. Right now, this boy needed help. She reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed one weathered hand on his shoulder. Gentle but firm, grounding. "Caleb," she said softly, her voice cutting through the noise around them. "Caleb, look at me." "Honey, I need you to look at me." His eyes darted to hers, wild, unfocused, drowning. "Good," she said. "You are safe right now. You are not alone. I'm right here with you, and I'm not going anywhere." Rebecca stayed on that cafeteria floor with Caleb, ignoring the stairs, ignoring the phones still recording, ignoring everything except the boy in front of her who needed to remember how to breathe. She guided him through it, slowly, patiently, the same way she had guided her daughter through nightmares when she was small, the same way Thomas had guided her through her own moments of panic after his death. "In through your nose," she said gently. "Slow. That's it. Hold it for just a second. Now out through your mouth. Again. You're doing so good, Caleb. Again." Gradually, painfully, his breathing began to even out. The terror in his eyes started to fade, replaced by exhaustion and embarrassment. The cafeteria around them was quieter now. Some students had gone back to their lunches. Others watched with something like respect or curiosity. One of the assistant principals had arrived and was dispersing the crowd, confiscating phones, restoring order. But Rebecca didn't move. She stayed right there on the floor beside Caleb, her hand still on his shoulder, her presence steady and unwavering. When he could finally speak, his voice came out hoarse and broken. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. Rebecca shook her head gently. "You don't have to apologize, honey. You don't have to explain. Sometimes our bodies just need to let out what our hearts have been carrying too long." She helped him to his feet, slowly, carefully, mindful of her own aching joints. "Come on, let's get you somewhere quiet." She led him to her small office behind the kitchen, barely more than a closet with a desk and a chair, but it was private. She sat him down, brought him water, gave him tissues. She didn't bombard him with questions, she just sat across from him and waited for his breathing to fully stabilize, waited for the shame and fear to settle, waited for him to be ready to speak if he wanted to. Finally he did. The words tumbled out in fragments, disconnected and raw. His father was in prison, had been for 3 years. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep their apartment, was barely home, was too exhausted to notice he was falling apart. He felt completely lost, completely invisible, completely worthless. School was hard. Life was harder. And today he'd just broken. The storm outside had triggered something inside, the darkness, the feeling of being trapped. It had all become too much. Rebecca listened without interrupting. She had learned long ago that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to simply bear witness to their pain, without trying to fix it, or minimize it, or make it more comfortable. When Caleb finally stopped talking, she reached across the desk and took his hand. "Caleb," she said quietly, "I want you to hear me. You are not invisible, you are not worthless, and you are not alone in this." She didn't preach. She didn't quote scripture at him. She just spoke truth, simple, honest truth. Life is hard right now. I won't lie to you and tell you it's going to get easier tomorrow. But I will tell you this, you have more strength in you than you realize. And there are people, even if it doesn't feel like it, who see you and care about what happens to you. I'm one of them. She paused. And God is another. Caleb's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know if I believe in God anymore," he whispered. Rebecca nodded. "That's okay, because God believes in you, and he's not going anywhere, even when you can't feel him." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "From now on, you come find me when things get hard, even if it's just to sit in this tiny office and not talk. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Do you hear me?" Caleb nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you." "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." She shook her head. "You would have found your way through, but I'm glad I could walk beside you for a moment." Before he left, she made him promise to check in with her every day, just a quick stop by the cafeteria, a wave, proof that he was still standing. He promised. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun came out bright and blinding against fresh snow that blanketed everything in white. School was closed for the start of Christmas break. Rebecca spent the day at home, alone, trying not to think about the empty chair at the dining room table or the mortgage notice still sitting on the kitchen counter. She tried to pray, but the words felt hollow. She tried to read, but couldn't focus. She just sat in the silence and tried to survive the loneliness. But something had shifted inside her, something small, but undeniable. The encounter with Caleb had reminded her of something she'd forgotten in the fog of her own grief, that even when your own life feels like it's falling apart, you can still show up for someone else. That even when you have nothing left to give, God can use your broken pieces to help hold someone else together. That maybe, just maybe, her purpose wasn't ending. Maybe it was just changing shape. Christmas came and went. Sarah sent a card and called briefly, her voice bright and distracted. Rebecca spent the day looking through old photo albums, crying over pictures of Thomas, praying prayers that felt like whispers into an empty void. But she didn't give up. She kept choosing, again and again, to believe that God hadn't forgotten her, even when all the evidence suggested otherwise. When school resumed in early January 2026, Rebecca returned to work with the same tired body and heavy heart. But there was Caleb, waiting by the cafeteria door before first period. He didn't say much, just nodded at her, gave a small smile, kept his promise. And every day after that, he stopped by. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. But he kept showing up, and so did she. And slowly, something began to heal in both of them. The first full week of January brought news Rebecca had been dreading. The school district finalized the budget cuts. Her position as cafeteria supervisor would be eliminated at the end of the month. They offered her a part-time role with reduced hours and no benefits. Basically a demotion disguised as a courtesy. At 69, with a mortgage she couldn't pay and no other prospects, Rebecca felt the ground disappearing beneath her feet. She tried to stay positive, tried to trust that God had a plan, but the fear was overwhelming. She spent her nights lying awake, doing math that never added up, looking at job postings for positions she was too old to get, wondering if she'd end up losing the house after all. The storm that had passed outside had been replaced by a storm inside, relentless, crushing, impossible to escape. One particularly brutal night, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table surrounded by bills and bank statements and notices stamped with words like past due and final warning. She put her head in her hands and let herself break, really break, in ways she hadn't let herself break since Thomas died. God, I can't do this, she sobbed. I've tried to have faith. I've tried to trust your timing, but I'm losing everything. I'm drowning, and I don't understand what you're doing. The silence that followed felt crushing. No answer, no comfort, no sign that anyone, even God, was listening. Rebecca stayed at that table for hours, tears streaming down her face, her faith hanging by the thinnest thread. She thought about giving up, thought about just letting it all collapse. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and exhaustion and despair, there was still a spark, small, barely alive, but refusing to die completely. A whisper that said, keep going. Just one more day, keep going. The next morning she went to work. She served breakfast. She smiled at students. She checked on Caleb. And when no one was looking, she whispered the prayer she'd been praying all month. God, I don't understand your timing, but teach me to trust it. In the second week of January, Rebecca was called into a meeting with the principal. She walked into the office with her heart pounding, assuming this was it. The official notice that her time was over, that she was being pushed out, that at 69 she was no longer valuable or necessary. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would maintain her dignity, how she would thank them for the years of employment, even though she felt betrayed and discarded. But when she sat down, the principal, a younger woman named Dr. Martinez, had an expression Rebecca couldn't quite read. Mrs. Turner, she began, I want to start by saying that over the past month I've been observing you closely. Rebecca's stomach dropped. Observed. That sounded ominous. I've watched how you interact with the students, Dr. Martinez continued. How you've been checking in on Caleb Hayes every single day since his panic attack. How the cafeteria has become calmer, more respectful. How students seem to trust you in ways they don't trust other adults in this building. Rebecca didn't know what to say. She just nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "I also heard about what you did during the storm, how you stayed with Caleb when everyone else was either laughing or recording, how you helped him through that crisis with more compassion and skill than some of our trained counselors could have mustered." She paused. "And it got me thinking, we're cutting positions in food service, yes, but we're also creating new positions in student support, and I want to offer you one." Rebecca blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Dr. Martinez smiled. "We're creating a new role, student support coordinator. It's part counselor, part mentor, part just safe adult presence. Someone students can go to when they're struggling. Someone who knows how to see the kids everyone else overlooks. Someone exactly like you, Mrs. Turner." She slid a paper across the desk. "Better pay than what you're making now, full benefits, and honestly, a role that honors the wisdom and heart you've been bringing to this building for years." Rebecca stared at the paper, unable to process what she was reading. "But I'm 69. Years old. I'm not trained. I don't have a degree in counseling or..." Dr. Martinez shook her head. "You have something better than a degree. You have experience. You have compassion. You have the kind of faith that shows up even when everything is falling apart. That's what these kids need. Not someone with credentials, someone who genuinely cares." For a long moment, Rebecca couldn't speak. Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of despair this time, but tears of shock, gratitude, disbelief. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Dr. Martinez smiled gently. "Say you'll think about it, pray about it, and let me know by the end of the week." Rebecca walked out of that office in a daze. She went through the rest of her day on autopilot, serving lunch, cleaning tables, checking on Caleb. But inside, something was shifting. A door she thought was closing was actually opening. A future she thought was ending was actually beginning. That night, she knelt beside her bed, something she hadn't done in weeks, and prayed through tears. "God, I wanted control. You gave me peace. I wanted answers. You gave me trust. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I thought you'd forgotten me." Rebecca accepted the position. At first, she felt overwhelmed, uncertain, inadequate, too old to be starting something new. But Dr. Martinez paired her with the school counselor for training, gave her resources, and most importantly, gave her permission to just be herself. "These kids don't need perfection, Dr. Martinez reminded her. "They need presence." So, Rebecca showed up. She created a small office, barely bigger than her old cafeteria closet, but she made it welcoming. A comfortable chair, a box of tissues, a sign on the door that said simply, "Safe space. All are welcome." And slowly, students began to come. Not just Caleb, though he remained a regular visitor, but others too. Kids who were struggling academically, kids dealing with family crises, kids who just needed an adult to see them and care. Rebecca didn't have all the answers. Sometimes she didn't have any answers, but she had something more valuable. She had the ability to sit with people in their pain without trying to fix it, to listen without judging, to pray silently while they poured out their hearts. And it made a difference. Fights in the cafeteria decreased. Student surveys showed increased feelings of support and belonging. Teachers noticed kids seemed less anxious, more engaged. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Caleb, the boy who had nearly broken that day during the storm, started attending a youth group at a local church. Rebecca hadn't pushed him toward it. She'd just mentioned in passing that her own faith had carried her through dark times. And if he ever wanted to explore that, there were good people who would welcome him. He went once out of curiosity, then kept going. He still struggled, still made mistakes, still carried pain. But he started believing his life had purpose, that someone truly cared about him. Inspired by Rebecca's example, the school launched a small emotional support program for vulnerable students. They partnered with local churches and community organizations to provide resources, counseling, tutoring, mentorship, even emergency assistance for families facing crises. What began as one woman's compassion for one suffering boy slowly grew into something much bigger. By the end of February, Rebecca's financial situation had stabilized. The better pay allowed her to catch up on mortgage payments. The benefits covered healthcare she desperately needed. For the first time since Thomas died, she could breathe without constant panic about money. But the real gift, the real miracle, wasn't financial. It was purpose. It was the realization that her life wasn't ending at 69. It was just beginning a new chapter. Rebecca's quiet faith began to ripple outward in ways she never expected. Other staff members noticed the change in her, the peace that had replaced anxiety, the hope that had replaced despair. They started seeking her out too, asking for prayer, sharing their own struggles. She became a presence in the building that went beyond her official role, a living reminder that faith can survive the darkest seasons and that God works even when we can't see it. The student support program continued to grow. By spring, they had helped dozens of kids access resources they needed. They had prevented several potential crises, suicide attempts, severe mental health breakdowns, situations that could have ended tragically. And while Rebecca wasn't solely responsible for all of it, everyone acknowledged that she had been the catalyst. Her willingness to kneel on a dirty cafeteria floor beside a panicking boy had started something the whole school community was now invested in. Caleb flourished in ways no one had predicted. He still had hard days. Healing isn't linear, but he became a peer mentor himself, helping other struggling students, sharing his own story of how Mrs. Turner had saved his life that day during the storm. He brought friends to youth group. He started talking about college, about becoming a counselor himself someday, about using his pain to help others. Rebecca watched him grow and felt her heart swell with gratitude. The ripple effect continued beyond the school. Rebecca started volunteering at the church Caleb attended, helping with outreach to at-risk youth and families in crisis. She didn't lead programs or give speeches. She just showed up, made coffee, listened to stories, prayed with people who felt forgotten. Her home, the house that had felt so empty after Thomas died, became a gathering place again. She hosted small groups for widows, for single parents, for anyone who needed a safe space to share their burdens. By late spring, even her relationship with her daughter Sarah had begun to heal. Sarah, inspired by stories of what her mother was doing, started calling more often, visiting more, regularly. She brought friends from Chicago to meet the amazing Mrs. Turner everyone kept talking about, and slowly, carefully, they rebuilt the connection grief had fractured. On the last night of January 2026, exactly 1 year after the darkest season of Rebecca's life had begun, she sat alone in her living room. But the solitude felt different now. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. Thomas's chair still sat in the corner, but it had become a comfort rather than a source of pain, a reminder of love that death couldn't erase. His Bible still rested on the nightstand, and Rebecca still read from it every morning, but now she added her own notes in the margins beside his. She held that worn Bible in her lap and ran her fingers over its soft pages. "God," she whispered into the quiet room, "I wanted control. You gave me peace. I wanted answers. You gave me trust. I wanted my old life back. You gave me a new purpose." Tears streamed down her face, tears of gratitude so deep they felt like worship. The end of 2025 almost broke me, but you were building something, even when I couldn't see it. Rebecca understood something profound in that moment. The miracle wasn't just the new job, the financial stability, the relationships restored. The true miracle was learning to rest in God's will even when life feels uncertain, painful, or lonely. It was discovering that faith isn't about having all the answers, it's about trusting the one who does. It was realizing that endings are often just disguised beginnings, and that God's timing, though mysterious, is always perfect. Her story didn't end with fame or recognition. It ended the way most true miracles do, quietly, humbly, in the sacred stillness of a life surrendered to God. She continued her work at the school. She continued mentoring students. She continued showing up for people who needed someone to see them. And every person who crossed her path left different, not because Rebecca was extraordinary, but because she had learned to let God be extraordinary through her. This is the truth Rebecca's life taught the world. God does not move according to our clock. God works in silence before he acts in the visible. God transforms fear into purpose. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not changing everything around us, but changing who we are within. Rebecca Turner was never just the cafeteria lady. She was a saint in sneakers, a miracle in motion, living proof that it's never too late for God to do something beautiful with a surrendered life. If you made it this far, it was not by chance. God placed this story in front of you because you needed to hear it. Now I want you to do something for me. Subscribe to the channel so you can keep receiving these stories that feed the soul. And in the comments, tell me which country you are from and share this with me. What did this testimony leave in your heart? Is there something in your life you need to surrender to God today? Share your prayer, your pain or your joy. Here we are a family and your story matters.